morning started like any other, quiet and calm with a thin mist rising off the lake. The man had lived in his lake house for decades, watching the seasons change over the water, raising his family there, and making countless memories. The soft sound of birds singing mixed with the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. It was a peaceful place, a personal sanctuary, a slice of life that felt untouchable. But on that morning, all of that peace would vanish in a matter of hours. He was just waking up, rubbing his eyes and yawning, when an unusual noise caught his attention. At first, he thought it was the wind or a particularly loud bird. But the sound kept growing louder, a low rumble that shook the window slightly. He stepped closer to the window and froze. Outside, he saw the unmistakable sight of bulldozers and heavy machinery moving toward his property. The heart of his chest thumped hard as he realized what was happening. His lake house was being demolished, and it was only 6 in the morning. Confusion, anger, and disbelief mixed together. He grabbed his phone, unsure of who to call first, and ran outside. The cool morning air hit his face as he stepped onto the driveway, and the smell of fresh earth and gasoline filled his nostrils. The machinery had already reached the side of his home. Workers moved with a strange confidence as if they owned the place, tearing down fences, knocking out windows, and beginning to pull apart the structure he had cherished for so long. Every step they took, every piece of wood and glass that shattered felt like a punch to the gut. He shouted at them, waving his arms and telling them to stop, but his voice was lost in the roar of the machines. Some of the workers looked up briefly, confusion crossing their faces, but they did not stop. One of them even shrugged and continued to operate the bulldozer. He ran closer, showing them the deed, the proof that the house and land belonged to him, but it seemed meaningless to them. The papers in his hand felt fragile against the force of the machinery. It was a surreal moment, standing in his driveway and watching years of his life being torn apart as though it were nothing. Neighbors began to come out of their homes, drawn by the noise and the commotion. They stood across the street whispering among themselves, some taking videos with their phones. A few shook their heads in disbelief, recognizing the man as someone who had lived there peacefully for years. The man tried to speak to them, telling them what was happening, but words failed him. His voice was thick with emotion, and even as he tried to explain, tears burned in his eyes. He could not understand how anyone could do this, how someone could come onto private property and act with such boldness. The demolition continued, the sounds of breaking wood, splintering glass, and the rumble of heavy machinery echoing through the quiet morning. It was almost unbearable, the speed at which everything he loved was disappearing. Family photos, furniture, heirlooms, and decades of personal history were being destroyed in minutes. The man felt a mixture of helplessness and fury. He could do nothing to stop the destruction, and yet he could not leave. This was his home, his life, and he could not turn away. He tried calling the local authorities immediately. The phone rang in his hand, each second feeling like an eternity. When someone finally answered, he explained frantically what was happening. The dispatcher told him they were sending someone over, but the man could hear the doubt in their voice. They asked for details and seemed unsure of what could be done in a situation where a construction crew had claimed permission. The man's frustration grew as he realized that even when trying to follow the law, bureaucracy was slow, unhelpful, and ineffective. While he waited for any official help, he did what he could. He ran toward the machines, trying to get in the way, waving documents and shouting for the operators to stop. His hands shook as he held up papers showing that he owned the land, but the workers seemed either unaware or unwilling to care. A neighbor stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder and offering quiet support. Others joined, standing near the edge of the demolition site, hoping to somehow intervene without getting hurt. It was a tense, chaotic scene, people shouting, machines moving, and a man desperately trying to protect what was his. Inside the house, the man's eyes darted around, seeing broken furniture, shattered glass, and walls coming down. Memories flashed before him. Family gatherings in the living room, quiet evenings by the fireplace, laughter echoing in the hallways. All of it was being ripped away in minutes. He could almost hear the echoes of past moments, as if the house itself were crying out, mourning the loss of everything that had made it a home. His chest ached and he felt a wave of despair wash over him, but he also felt a spark of determination. He would not give up, not now, not ever. As the demolition continued, someone from the crew finally approached him. They were young and nervous, glancing at the others, unsure of what to do. The man tried to speak to them calmly, explaining the situation and showing the legal documents once more. The worker hesitated, looking at the bulldozer, then back at the papers. For a moment, it seemed like maybe they would stop, but the supervisor waved them on and the machines roared back to life. It was as if the man's ownership meant nothing to them, as if he were invisible. The neighbors continued to watch in shock, some filming, some trying to shout instructions, but none of it seemed to make a difference. The man's emotions were raw, a mix of grief, anger, and disbelief. He could not understand how anyone could be so cruel, so reckless, so willing to destroy someone's life in the early hours of the morning. The sheer audacity of it stunned him. He thought about calling media, about showing the world what was happening, but he also feared retaliation. Still, he knew he had to act. This was more than just a house. It was his life, his history, and he would not stand by silently. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the local police arrived. Their presence was comforting at first, but it quickly became clear that they were unsure how to proceed. They asked for identification and proof, but the man could see the hesitation in their eyes. The crew continued their work, but now under the watchful gaze of law enforcement. The man explained everything, showing deeds, surveys, and old tax records. Slowly, the officers began to understand that this was no simple case of a permit or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate and it was criminal. By the time the morning sun rose higher in the sky, much of the house was gone. The man stood in the yard, exhausted, shaken, and heartbroken, but not defeated. He had proof, he had witnesses, and he had determination. The destruction had been swift and brutal, but it had also set in motion a series of events that could not be ignored. Neighbors came closer now, offering support, some bringing blankets, water, and comfort. It was a small gesture, but it reminded him that he was not alone. The man knew that this was only the beginning. He would need lawyers, investigators, and the full force of the law to reclaim what had been taken from him. But for now he stood in the rubble of his home, looking over the lake, remembering the life that had been and steeling himself for the fight ahead. This morning had started like any other, but it had quickly turned into a nightmare. Yet even in the midst of destruction, he felt a flicker of resolve. He would not be broken. He would see justice done, and the people responsible for this audacity would face the consequences. The lake house may have been damaged, but the spirit of the man and the support of the community were unshakable, forming the first steps toward reclaiming everything that had been lost. The man stood in his yard, staring at the remains of what had been his home. The demolition had stopped, but the damage was done. Pieces of wood, broken glass, and crushed furniture were scattered across the lawn. The lake that had once reflected the morning sun now mirrored his despair. He felt a deep sense of loss, but he knew he could not let himself sink into hopelessness. He had to act, and quickly, before those responsible disappeared or destroyed more evidence. He took out his phone and began calling anyone who might help. Lawyers, friends, local authorities, all of them. His voice was firm but urgent as he explained the situation, hoping that someone could intervene before it escalated further. Calls were made, messages were sent, and soon a small network of support began to form around him. Some neighbors offered their knowledge of property lines. Others offered to watch over the remaining parts of the land. Everyone seemed to understand that this was not just a case of vandalism or a simple mistake. It was an attack on someone's life and history, and it needed immediate attention. Within the hour, a lawyer arrived carrying a briefcase filled with documents. The man handed over every paper he had: deeds, surveys, tax records, and old letters confirming ownership. The lawyer examined each one carefully, nodding as the pieces came together. "This is clear fraud," the lawyer said quietly. "Someone has forged documents to claim your property. We need to act fast." The man felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that someone finally understood. Anxiety because he knew the process would be difficult and slow if left to normal channels. Meanwhile, local media began arriving. A neighbor had shared footage online, showing the destruction in real time, and reporters had picked it up. Cameras were set up along the street, microphones pointed toward the man as he told his story. He spoke clearly, describing how he had woken to the sound of machines tearing apart his home and how he had tried to stop it. The reporters listened, nodding, and some took photos of the remaining rubble. The story spread quickly, with viewers shocked at the audacity of those responsible. People from other neighborhoods called, offering advice, support, and sometimes even legal contacts. The man realized that public attention might be his strongest ally. As the morning turned to afternoon, the police returned with a small team, looking more serious this time. They had reviewed the situation and begun contacting the demolition company. Officers questioned the workers and supervisors, taking statements and photographs. Some of the workers admitted that they had been told the land was legally cleared for demolition, but they were unaware of any forged documents. Their hesitation and confusion helped the man see that this had been carefully planned by those in charge, using ordinary workers as tools for their scheme. The lawyer advised him to remain calm but vigilant. Legal steps would have to be taken immediately to stop any further action against his property. Notices could be filed, and federal authorities might need to be contacted if the fraud involved forgery or conspiracy. The man felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that every move he made had to be precise or the chance to reclaim his home could slip away. Yet despite the tension, he found a strange kind of energy rising within him. He could not undo what had happened, but he could ensure that those responsible would face consequences. By mid-afternoon, the first wave of evidence collection was complete. The lawyer and a few neighbors walked through the property, taking notes, photographing documents, and recording what remained of the home. Every detail mattered. Broken windows, splintered doors, and even tire tracks from the machinery could be used to prove the illegal demolition. The man remembered where each piece of furniture had been placed, the location of every family photo, and shared that with the team. It was painstaking work, but he knew it was necessary. Every small fact could make the difference in court. The media continued to cover the story, broadcasting live updates and interviewing neighbors who had witnessed the early morning chaos. The man noticed how the community began to rally behind him. People he had known for years came to offer support, bringing food, water, and moral encouragement. Some spoke on camera, expressing outrage at the demolition and offering their own experiences with local developers or authorities. This collective voice added strength to the man's case, showing that the attack on his property was not just a private matter, but a community concern. The attention also put pressure on the authorities to take swift action, as the public demanded accountability. As evening approached, the man received a call that changed the course of the day. A contact from the lawyer's office informed him that federal investigators were now aware of the situation. They had started looking into the forged documents, tracking the chain of responsibility, and identifying the people who had orchestrated the demolition. The man felt a surge of hope. What had started as a personal disaster was now being treated as a serious legal case with national attention. He realized that the early morning chaos had set in motion events that could lead to justice being served, and he felt a renewed determination to see it through. During the night, the man stayed awake on the property, walking among the debris, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the memories that had been lost, but also about the support he had received. It reminded him that material things could be replaced, but community and truth were far more valuable. He reviewed the timeline in his mind, recalling every detail: the sound of the bulldozers, the confusion of the workers, the reactions of the neighbors. Each moment became a piece of the story he would tell the authorities and eventually the world. He also thought strategically about the next steps. Legal filings needed to be submitted first thing in the morning, media coverage had to be managed carefully, and communication with federal authorities needed to be clear and factual. He made a list of tasks, assigning priority to each. It was exhausting work, but the man knew that meticulous planning was essential. This was no longer just about a destroyed home. It was about holding accountable those who thought they could act with impunity. As the first signs of dawn appeared on the horizon, the man felt a quiet resolve settle over him. The destruction of his home had been brutal and unfair, but it had also revealed weaknesses in the people who had carried it out. The workers had been misled. Neighbors had witnessed the crime, and documentation of every action had been preserved. With the law, media, and community on his side, he began to see a path forward. It would not be easy, and the coming days would demand courage and persistence, but he was ready. The fight for justice had begun, and he was determined to see it through no matter how long it took. Even in the face of such loss, he could sense the tide beginning to turn. The day had started with chaos and despair, but by nightfall, hope had emerged. The man understood that what he had endured would not define him, but his response would. He had been wronged, yes, but he was not defeated. And with that thought, he prepared himself for the next phase, knowing that every action he took in the coming hours could help restore not just his home, but his sense of security, dignity, and justice. The next morning, the man awoke to a fresh sense of determination. The previous day had been a whirlwind of shock, loss, and frantic action. Now, with daylight streaming across the lake, he felt ready to face the reality of what had happened and the challenge that lay ahead. He dressed quickly, grabbed his notes and documents, and walked back to the remains of his house. The wreckage still smoldered with the memory of destruction, but he refused to let despair take hold. Every broken window, splintered door, and scattered piece of furniture was a reminder of why he had to act, not of how defeated he was. By mid-morning, his lawyer had arrived with a more detailed plan. They needed to gather additional evidence, speak to witnesses, and start documenting everything for possible criminal proceedings. The man explained everything he knew about the demolition, from how it had begun at 6 a.m. to the way the workers had responded. They reviewed the photographs and videos taken by neighbors, carefully noting any details that might prove crucial. Each image of machinery tracks, torn walls, or damaged property was a piece of the puzzle. He realized that this step-by-step collection of evidence could be the difference between rebuilding his home and losing the case entirely. Meanwhile, more neighbors came to offer help. Some brought cameras to document the site, while others shared stories of encounters with the same development company in the past. These accounts revealed a troubling pattern. The company had a history of intimidating homeowners and using forged documents to seize properties. The man listened intently, making notes and connecting each story to his own experience. The sense of community support was uplifting. People he had only waved to in passing now stood beside him, helping him plan the next steps, offering advice and even volunteering to testify if needed. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, people could come together to fight for justice. By late morning, the police returned with more officers, this time accompanied by an investigator specializing in property fraud. They examined the demolition site, talking to witnesses and taking detailed notes. They asked the man to provide a timeline of events and to describe any interactions with the workers or supervisors. As he spoke, he noticed how seriously they were taking his statements. He realized that this case was beginning to gain momentum. The combination of community support, legal representation, and now official investigation gave him hope that those responsible would be held accountable. Around noon, a breakthrough came. One of the workers from the demolition crew called, clearly nervous. He admitted that the company had instructed them to demolish the property using falsified documents. He shared names, dates, and other details that could link the scheme directly to the people in charge. The man took careful notes, knowing this testimony could prove critical. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Finally, there was a clear path to exposing the truth, and it showed that not everyone involved in the demolition had been acting knowingly. Some had been deceived, while others were actively complicit. The man and his lawyer spent the afternoon organizing all the new information. The forged documents, eyewitness statements, photographs, and videos were cataloged meticulously. They began drafting a report that could be submitted to higher authorities, including the FBI, because it was becoming clear that this was more than a local dispute. The fraudulent actions and the audacity of the demolition had national implications. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every piece of evidence had to be perfect, every statement precise, because there would be no room for error. While organizing the evidence, the man received another call from the media. Reporters had been following the story since the day before and were eager to know the latest developments. He agreed to speak briefly, carefully explaining the steps being taken to hold those responsible accountable. He emphasized the role of the community and the importance of proper legal procedures. The interview was broadcast live and social media lit up with comments of support. The public interest added pressure on the authorities to act swiftly. He realized that keeping the story in the public eye could help ensure that justice was not delayed or ignored. Late in the afternoon, the first federal investigator arrived at the site. She introduced herself as a property fraud specialist and immediately began reviewing the documentation the man and his lawyer had compiled. She asked detailed questions about the property, the timeline of the demolition, and any interactions with the workers or the company. The man answered honestly, providing every detail he could recall. The investigator nodded, impressed by the thoroughness of his records and the cooperation of the neighbors. She assured him that this case would be investigated thoroughly and that the people responsible would be held accountable. As the day went on, more information came to light. The lawyer uncovered a series of emails and internal documents from the demolition company, revealing a coordinated effort to falsify ownership claims and force homeowners off their land. Each document added weight to the case and painted a clear picture of intentional wrongdoing. The man felt a mix of anger and determination. Anger at the people who had destroyed his home and determination to see that they faced consequences for their actions. He knew that patience and persistence would be necessary, but he also knew that the truth was on his side. Neighbors continued to offer support, checking in regularly and providing additional evidence they had gathered. Some had old photographs showing the property's history, while others had records of previous encounters with the company. The man realized that the strength of the community could not be underestimated. Each person who came forward added credibility to his claims and strengthened the case against the perpetrators. It was not just a legal battle. It was a collective effort to protect what was rightfully theirs. By evening, the man and his lawyer had organized everything into a comprehensive file. It included photographs, videos, eyewitness statements, forged documents, and communication with the demolition company. The file was prepared for submission to federal authorities, along with a request for an urgent investigation. The man felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that despite the chaos and destruction, they had created a solid foundation for justice. The process had been exhausting, but it had also been empowering. He realized that even in the face of immense loss, action and persistence could turn the tide. As night fell, the man walked along the lake, reflecting on the events of the past 2 days. He thought about the destruction, the loss, and the betrayal, but also about the support he had received, the evidence he had gathered, and the people who were standing with him. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, a quiet reminder of the life he had built and the home he was determined to reclaim. He felt a sense of resolve stronger than ever. This was not just about a house. It was about justice, accountability, and the principles that defined him. He reviewed the plan for the next day in his mind. Federal authorities would be contacted directly, additional witness statements might be collected, and the media coverage would be managed to maintain public interest. Every step had to be deliberate, every decision carefully considered. He understood the importance of patience and strategy in ensuring that justice would prevail. The man also realized that this experience had taught him resilience. He had faced sudden, unexpected destruction and had not given in to despair. Instead, he had taken action, mobilized support, and prepared for the fight ahead. As he returned to the property one last time before resting, he felt a quiet determination. The debris and broken structures were reminders of what had been lost, but they were also evidence of what could be reclaimed. The man knew that the coming days would be challenging, but he felt prepared. With community support, legal guidance, and federal investigators now involved, he saw a clear path forward. The destruction of his lake house had been a cruel act, but it had also ignited a chain of events that would uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice. He stood at the edge of the water, looking at the moon's reflection, and took a deep breath. The fight was far from over, but he felt ready. The man understood that justice would require time, effort, and unwavering commitment. He had begun documenting every detail, gathering evidence, and building a case that could not be ignored. And as he looked at the lake, he silently vowed that he would not rest until the people who had taken his home faced the consequences of their actions. The night was calm, but within him a storm of determination burned bright, guiding him through the next phase of the journey to reclaim what was rightfully his. The following morning, the man awoke with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. After days of shock, chaos, and frantic activity, the involvement of federal authorities had given him hope, but the reality of what lay ahead was daunting. He dressed quickly, grabbed his notes, and returned to the site of his destroyed home. The debris still covered the yard, and the air smelled faintly of dust and crushed wood. But amidst the destruction there was a sense of purpose now. The fight for justice had begun in earnest. By mid-morning, federal agents arrived, dressed in plain clothes but with an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. They introduced themselves and explained their role in investigating property fraud and forgery. The man showed them all the documentation he had collected over the past days: deeds, surveys, videos, photographs, and statements from neighbors and workers. The agents listened carefully, asking detailed questions about the demolition, the company responsible, and any communications he had received. Every piece of information he provided helped them build a clearer picture of the illegal activity. The agents then began speaking with witnesses. Neighbors recounted what they had seen early that morning: the sound of bulldozers, the workers tearing apart the house, and the man's frantic attempts to stop the destruction. They described the timeline in detail, the vehicles used, and even the license plates of trucks that had entered the property. Each statement added weight to the case, forming a chain of evidence that was difficult to dispute. The man felt a deep sense of relief and gratitude. After days of feeling powerless, he now had professionals on his side who could bring the truth to light. While the agents worked, the man and his lawyer continued reviewing the company's documents and internal communications. They discovered emails and memos that suggested a deliberate plan to falsify ownership records and demolish properties quickly before homeowners could react. The scheme was bold, audacious, and illegal, and it became clear that multiple people were involved. The man's anger grew as he realized how calculated the plan had been, but he also felt empowered. With evidence like this, there was a real chance of holding the culprits accountable. One of the workers who had helped demolish the house was brought in to speak with the agents. He admitted that he had been instructed to follow orders without question, and had been told the property was legally cleared. He provided names and details of the supervisors who had organized the demolition, confirming suspicions that this was not a random act, but a coordinated effort. The man listened quietly, taking mental notes, aware that this testimony was a crucial piece of the puzzle. He was beginning to see the structure of the conspiracy unfold before him. By afternoon, the agents had started tracing the fraudulent documents back to their origin. Each signature, each notarized page, and each alteration was analyzed with care. It was clear that someone within the company had orchestrated the forgeries, and the man's property had been one of several targeted in a larger scheme. The lawyer explained that these findings strengthened the case for both criminal and civil proceedings. The man realized that what had felt like a personal attack was actually part of a much larger criminal operation. The scope was wider than he had imagined, but that also meant that bringing the truth to light could have far-reaching consequences. The media, still covering the story, reported live as federal agents moved through the site, collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. Cameras captured the agents taking photographs, documenting broken structures, and analyzing debris. Social media lit up with updates, and public support surged. Comments of encouragement and outrage poured in from across the country. The man felt a mixture of pride and relief. The story had captured the attention of the public, putting additional pressure on authorities to act swiftly and ensuring that the perpetrators could not easily hide behind bureaucratic delays. As evening approached, the agents summarized their progress. They explained that they had enough evidence to move forward with criminal investigations, and that the individuals responsible for the demolition would likely face serious charges. The man listened carefully, absorbing the information, realizing that after days of despair and uncertainty, justice was finally within reach. He felt a cautious optimism, tempered by the knowledge that legal proceedings could take time, but reassured that the truth was coming to light. Neighbors remained by his side throughout the day, offering support and assistance. Some helped catalog additional items found in the rubble, while others prepared meals and shared stories of past interactions with the company. Their presence provided comfort and strength. The man realized that he was not alone in this fight, and the solidarity of the community reinforced his determination. Together, they had transformed a moment of vulnerability into a collective effort for justice. Late in the night, after the agents had left, the man walked along the edge of the lake, reflecting on the events of the day. The water was calm, mirroring the stars above, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel peace amidst the chaos. He thought about the destruction of his home, the theft of his property, and the fear he had experienced. But he also thought about the evidence gathered, the support of the community, and the professionalism of the federal agents. A sense of resolve settled over him. The fight was far from over, but he knew that with persistence and careful action, justice would prevail. He spent the rest of the night planning the next steps, Communication with federal authorities would continue, and additional evidence would be collected as needed. Witnesses might be called for follow-up interviews, and media coverage would be managed to maintain public awareness. He also considered the long-term goal, rebuilding his home and restoring his life. The thought of reconstruction provided a glimmer of hope, a vision of a future where the lake house would once again stand proudly by the water. By the next morning, the man was ready to take the next steps in his battle for justice. The federal investigation had begun, the company's fraud was exposed, and the community support was unwavering. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. The destruction of his home had been a profound loss, but it had also revealed the strength of his resolve and the power of truth. He understood that perseverance, careful planning, and unwavering determination were essential in holding those responsible accountable. The lake, calm and steady, reflected the morning sun, reminding the man of the enduring nature of life and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. He knew that the coming days would bring new challenges, but he was prepared. The efforts of the federal agents, the dedication of his lawyer, and the support of his neighbors had created a foundation that could not easily be shaken. The man walked along the water, taking deep breaths, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the quiet strength that comes from fighting for what is right. By the time the sun had fully risen, he felt a sense of clarity. The path forward was challenging, but it was visible. Justice would not come instantly, but it was attainable. The destruction of his home had sparked a series of events that would expose the truth and ensure accountability. And while he had lost a physical space, he had gained a community, allies, and the unwavering determination to see the fight through to the end. The man understood that this was not just about a lake house, it was about integrity, justice, and the courage to stand against wrongdoing, no matter the odds.